Greetings, I'm John Phillips. Thanks for joining us for this PJTV special. We're well into the new year, so how are those New Year's resolutions going? Are you sticking to them? Are you still trying to maintain a gluten-free lifestyle? Well, today we're going to be debunking food myths like, is gluten really bad for you? Joining me to help in this quest is emergency room physician and president of Victory Health, Dr. Kelly Victory. Also on today's panel is parent, PJTV contributor, stand-up comic, and about 1,500 other things, Stephen Cruiser. There are more products than ever that promote a healthy diet. However, if you do research, some of those products may actually be doing more harm than good. First, let's go ahead and start with the organic food movement. Dr. Victory, how is something organic and does it actually help?
Well, the term organic in the food industry does not mean the same thing it means to scientists across the world, where organic simply means containing carbon. But as it pertains to the food industry, what we're talking about are things that use cultural, biological, mechanical processes that maintain biodiversity and recycling, those sorts of things. And in general, translates into not using pesticides or synthetic fertilizers and those sorts of things. There is not a shred of evidence that eating organic foods versus other traditionally farmed foods is in any way healthier or less healthy than anything else. Furthermore, there's no evidence that organic food actually tastes better or has higher nutritional value, despite the fact that that is widely believed amongst the population.
This is good because, Cruiser, we can now go back to buy the cheaper blueberries.
I've always been buying the cheaper blueberries. Hey, yeah. Look, because I want people in Africa to live, I've always been big on pesticides. Yay, DDT. There's never, nobody is dying. This is the thing. People aren't dying from having pesticides used on food. It's a myth. There were people that will tell you that. I mean, I know plenty, you encounter many very, let's say, 60s throwback hippies types when it comes to food in LA. One of my favorite restaurants has a waitress that she would always, well, the GMOs and the organic and the this and the that and kombucha. And I would just sit there and go, you know, none of that's hurting it. None of that's hurting anybody. And you're selling pizza dough to people right now.
Right. And we've created an industry on that concept that organic is healthier, that there's higher vitamin content, that it tastes better, and simply in study after study after study, blinded studies, there's no evidence of that. And frankly, you should be washing your fruits and vegetables when you bring them home, because you're more likely to pick up something from the hand of the person who picked the fruit or vegetable, regardless of whether or not it was farmed organically.
It's always seemed to me to be a placebo for yuppies.
Oh, it is. Now, the only time I would say that for having organic meats that are not using antibiotics or hormones, where there aren't antibiotics and hormones added to the food that is being fed to the cows or the pigs or the chickens, that probably has some benefit because we shouldn't be taking in additional hormones. But fruits, vegetables, organically grown corn, please.
Yeah. Get a kosher butcher. So your meat is fine. That's what I've got. I've got the kosher place up the street. That's where I go to get my meat. But it's also a little ruse because now, like, even the farmers markets, they have to be certified organic. So there's another bureaucratic job that's been created there. This guy has to come by and look at it and say, okay, the stuff that the farmer just brought is real farmer stuff, and it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I go to the farmers market because I like supporting the farmers. That's the reason I go there. I like their stuff lasts twice as long as the stuff I get in the grocery store usually. But the fact that they need to have the thing now that's certified organic is absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
How about ionized water? My grandma is big into that kick, and it just never seemed like it made any sense to me.
It seemed like it didn't make sense because it doesn't. So here's the theory. We're going to cleave water into its component parts of hydrogen and oxygen by running some current through it or using some sort of electrical, electrolysis where we're going to separate the two ions, and they're going to be ionized for about 1 picosecond until you actually spray it on your plants or drink it or whatever else. It makes no sense. Of all the things that we could come up with, really, as a health benefit, to hit on water, independent of Flint, Michigan, where people actually are getting ill from drinking the tap water, municipal plumbing is one of the great successes we've had in this country. Drinking water out of the tap actually has done us pretty well, and people are not
It tastes good here, too.
Yes, it tastes good, and people are not dying from it. But the idea that you would cleave water electrically and then it would somehow stay there and give you some sort of a health benefit. Next thing you know, your arthritis goes away in a week, maybe 2 if you start using this. It's absolutely insane. There is no science behind it whatsoever that drinking something that has been briefly ionized would be beneficial.
You ever try that stuff, Cruiser?
No, it's like the only, having been on the road most of my life, I do know from city to city that the tap water varies greatly. I mean, there are some places where you can just like smell it in the hotel that it's not a good thing. I remember when my sister lived in Vegas and I first got there, she's like, not with the tap water.
Yes.
And I didn't listen, and then I stayed in my room a good portion of the
in
week.
Vegas, the clear liquids you're drinking are not water.
But a 15-cent charcoal filter will do a great job at taking impurities out of water. A 15-cent charcoal filter, which is not as much fun as a $3,000 cool, uber, high-tech looking ionizer, but the 15-cent charcoal filter.
And that's what I did. Brita has always had this like travel thing that's got a little charcoal filter in it, and you bring that, and I put the tap water in that when I'm on the road. That's what I do.
GMOs, are they as evil as we're told they are?
Man has been genetically modifying foods and animals and plants for about 12,000 years. Actually, some of our best medicines are made by genetically modifying things. That's where insulin, one of the primary forms of insulin that we use today for diabetes, is actually produced by a bacterium that has been genetically modified. When you genetically modify something, you are not doing something to your own DNA as a human being. What you're doing is trying to imbue that plant or animal with resistance, for example, to disease, resistance to mold, or trying to breed in or out traits that are desirable or undesirable. The concept that this is in some way dangerous is patently absurd. In fact, Harvard School of Public Health, which is not exactly a bastion of conservatism, has come out over and over again in support of genetically modifying foods, because it's one of the best ways to cut down on use, for example, of pesticides. If you want to cut down on pesticides and get back to organic, one of the best ways to do that is to breed plants and animals that are resistant to disease. So, absolutely.
You follow the anti-GMO crowd?
This is my biggest rant of all the food fads that there are, is the GMO thing, for a variety of reasons. If GMOs are as awful as everybody says they are, then Gregor Mendel was history's greatest monster, practically. But GMOs have the potential to do things with crops to make them more plentiful. GMOs could be the greatest thing in combating global hunger that we've seen out there, and you've got people actively pushing against that. You've got people fighting something that could potentially increase crops so much that we will always have an abundance and people will never have to go hungry again.
Well, when you think about it, and you go back into the history of the country, the percent of the country that worked in the agricultural industry or various industries related to that was huge. My own family, they were cattle ranchers and avocado farmers. Now nobody's still in the business because a tiny percent of the public actually works in those fields because we're so efficient with it.
Right. And so if you want to make a geopolitical statement, that's where some people started with their concern about GMOs, was that, oh my gosh, somebody's going to develop a strain of corn that's resistant to this blight, and then they're going to unleash the blight on everybody else who doesn't have that strain of corn, and they're going to take market share. Those are geopolitical arguments that are theoretical at best, and perhaps worthy of splitting a bottle of wine over, but but creating an entire industry in genetically, there's no genetically modified organism in here is ridiculous.
Yeah. And the geopolitical, I mean, that's a great TV episode there. I mean, that's an episode of The Blacklist. That's fun to think about. But they're always coming up with something like that. But the notion that it's just, the thing is about this. Okay, I'm a lay person. I'm not a medical professional. This stuff is really easy to research. That's the thing. This isn't a lengthy process. This is like Google and a half an hour of reading.
But the mommy blogs all say the wrong thing, though.
The mommy blogs are wrong about everything. Okay?
I was going to say people who don't want you to vaccinate your kids because it will, produce autism.
But people listen to it.
I know.
Well, that's another. Those people that if you actually could do some bad with GMOs, that's who I'd target first. But I can't do anything bad with GMOs.
All right, let's move on to gluten, because the anti-gluten movement is now so big. If you go on an airline, you can call ahead for a gluten-free meal.
Yeah. There's been no greater fraud perpetrated on the American population when it comes to food than this idea of gluten-free, or that gluten is somehow evil. About somewhere between 1 and 0.5% of the population has celiac disease, which is a very easily tested for problem in the gut where one is not able to handle the proteins gluten. Gluten is a group of, it's actually not a single protein, it's a complex of proteins found primarily in wheat and some similar grains like barley and rye. But the idea that everybody will benefit from a diet that does not have gluten is ridiculous. So what's happened is we've created an entire industry. Not only are there entire sections of grocery stores that have gluten-free foods, but you can go to the restaurants have gluten-free menus.
Pizza places.
Said, absolutely.
It tastes gross too.
And gluten has become, synonymous with healthful. It doesn't have gluten, and I say, and that's good because it's only made with butter, egg yolks, and sugar. Awesome, that's gluten-free, but it is not healthy. So the idea that people will not hurt themselves by avoiding gluten, but the concept that they are doing themselves any benefit unless they're one of the very, very small percentage of people who have certified celiac disease, they're buying into hype.
I have one friend who has celiac, one. And it's awful if she gets slipped even a little bit of gluten. It's a horrible reaction that she has. Everyone else I know who's gluten-free is gluten-free most of the time, and then every once in a while they'll let it slip and it doesn't really hurt, and then oh yeah. So it's more like a fashion. In the 80s, I remember when I first started going on the road and dealing with a lot of comics like to just not eat red meat a lot. They like to pretend they were vegans, but they really weren't. They just didn't eat red meat, and it was more a fashion choice. I even did it for a little while. Just because I was like, I'm not going to eat red meat, and then, I don't eat red meat. It becomes I am gluten-free. I mean, religious suppliers make gluten-free hosts for Catholic and Anglican churches now.
Yes.
Even though
that's unbelievable.
Yeah, even though that there aren't a lot of celiac people going to communion every week.
And the zealots will tell you, no, seriously, since I've gone gluten-free, I've either lost 30 pounds or my blood sugar's become normal. And I'll say, really, what is it you're doing differently? Well, I used to eat, cake and cookies and crackers all night long, and now I just eat fruits and vegetables. I'm like, oh, must be those nasty glutens. It's not the glutens, it's that you cleaned up your diet, and I'm all for that. Eating more fruits and vegetables, eating less processed foods, eating less refined sugars, that you will lose weight and you will feel better, but it has nothing to do with gluten.
Well, just for the record, can celiac disease kill you if you eat gluten, or is it just going to cause you to blow up a bathroom?
It will cause you horrible symptoms. It's not fatal. It is not fatal, but you do.
It's painful.
It is painful.
Yeah,
People
okay.
get very, very ill. It does create a malabsorption problem, so you can become vitamin deficient for certain, because you simply aren't able to absorb the nutrients that are in the other foods that you eat if you're having a celiac flare-up.
But the people giving up gluten and opting for more fruits and vegetables should think about how much cheaper those fruits and vegetables would be if they were genetically modified.
All right, last one before we go. High fructose corn syrup, good or bad?
There's no problem. The problem with high fructose corn syrup is that it's a sugar like any other sugar. The idea that high fructose corn syrup is more dangerous or has ill effects versus regular fructose, glucose, sucrose, which is table sugar, is ridiculous. The reason we've had an increase in the incidence of diabetes and obesity in this country is because we have greatly increased the amount of sugar and calories that we eat while decreasing the amount of activity that we're getting. Your pancreas doesn't know the difference between whether it's getting high fructose corn syrup or sucrose. It simply doesn't in the long run.
Why is it that big companies like Coca-Cola make Coca-Cola with real sugar in Mexico and the high fructose corn syrup here then?
Well, high fructose corn syrup is cheaper, it's easier to handle, and it is cheaper in the long run. Some people prefer the taste, actually, of the one made with sucrose. So it's interesting because, you're going to use whatever's cheap, whatever you can get your hands on that's cheaper. So here in the United States, they're using primarily high fructose corn syrup, but it's not because
it's a taste bud issue.
Yes, it's taste
Which
bud.
one do you prefer, Cruiser? The Mexican Coke or the American Coke?
I can barely tell the difference between the two of them, to tell you the truth. But the thing with the high fructose corn syrup is, in America especially, I can't speak for the rest of the planet, but I know in America, it's a portion and consumption problem. It's not
Right.
bad because
Right.
it's bad. It's bad because you're having 90 times the amount of it that you need, and you don't need that much sugar. Everything in America is this overconsumption. You look at like some of the healthiest populations around the globe right now. They're all about portion control. They minimal intake of food, minimal intake of anything. If
And exercise.
If I have one piece of pizza, it's okay. If I have the whole pizza, it's bad. If I have 1 or 2 cocktails at night, it's fine. If I have 12 cocktails, I'm hungover. It's a scale thing. It's always a scale thing with Americans, and nobody wants to admit that, and nobody wants to deal with that. Nobody wants to just say, I should eat less and exercise more, because that's not pretty and that's not easy to sell.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is that conventional science pales in comparison. It's simply not sexy. Eat less, exercise more isn't sexy. Get a $3,000 ionizer, go gluten-free, and stay away from those nasty GMOs. That's sexy. That's fun. That's got some panache.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there because we have plenty of pizza to eat with gluten for lunch. I want to thank Stephen Cruiser and Dr. Kelly Victory for being here today to debunk these food myths. I'm John Phillips. Thanks for watching this PJTV special.